Imagine
What
for
if
a
I told
moment
you the
that
first people who
everything
land
you've
on
ever
Mars
been
may
told
become
about the
the
universe,
most
every
famous humans
documentary
in
you've
history,
watched, every diagram
but
you've
they
seen,
may never
every
step foot
confident
on Earth
statement about
again?
infinity
This
might be
mission
built
won't be
on
a
an
simple
assumption
space
that
trip.
no one has
It
actually
could be a
proven.
one-way journey
We
into
grow
the
up hearing
unknown,
that the universe
where a
goes
single
on forever,
mistake means
stretching
death
endlessly
and
in all
rescue is
directions,
almost
a boundless
impossible.
ocean of stars and
Imagine leaving your
galaxies.
family,
It
your
sounds
planet,
grand, almost
and
poetic.
everything you've
But
ever
what
known
if that
forever.
idea isn't
Would you
true?
still
What
go?
if the universe is not
Before we
infinite at
begin,
all, and the
comment
real
below
story is
where you're
far more
watching
strange,
from,
more
and if you'd
subtle,
have the
and far
courage
more
to take
fascinating than
humanity's
anything
most
you've
dangerous
imagined?
trip?
Now, here's where
The
things get
enormous
interesting.
distance
When you
between
look
Earth
up at
and
the night
Mars
sky,
is
you
one of
feel
the
like you're
biggest
seeing the
reasons
universe
why the
itself.
first
It
humans
feels
on Mars
complete,
may never
vast,
return.
and overwhelming.
Unlike
But in
traveling to the
reality, you
moon,
are only
which
seeing
is
a tiny
relatively close
fragment
to
of
Earth,
what's out there. A
Mars sits
limited
at a
window
far greater
shaped not by
distance
the
that
size of the
constantly
universe,
changes as
but by
both
the speed
planets
of
orbit the
light and the
Sun.
history of time
At the
itself.
closest
That
point,
alone should make you
Mars can be
pause,
around
because
54
it
million
means that the
kilometers
biggest
away,
question we can
but at
ask,
other
how big
times
is
it
the
can be
universe
more than
really, is
400
also one of
million
the hardest
kilometers
to answer. And
distant.
yet,
This
scientists
means
have
any
not given
mission
up
to
on this
Mars
question.
must wait for the
Instead,
right
they've
launch
approached
window.
it with a kind of
What if
curiosity
I
that
told you the
refuses
first
to
people who
accept
land on
easy
Mars may
answers.
become
They've
the
asked,
most
does
famous
space curve?
humans in
Can it wrap
history?
around itself? Could you
But they
travel
may never
forever and
step foot
somehow
on
end up
Earth
where you
again.
started without
This
ever
mission
turning
won't be a
around?
simple
These are
space
not
trip.
philosophical
It
riddles.
could be a
They are
one-way
real,
journey into
testable
the
ideas
unknown,
grounded in
where a single
physics. And
mistake
when you
means
begin to
death
follow this line
and
of
rescue
thinking,
is
something
almost
incredible
impossible.
happens. The universe
Imagine
stops
leaving your
being a
family, your
simple,
planet,
infinite backdrop
and
and starts
everything you've ever
becoming a
known forever.
dynamic,
Would you
mysterious
still
structure
go?
with rules we are still
Before we
trying to
begin,
uncover. What
comment
makes this
below
journey
where
even
you're
more
watching
exciting
from,
is that
and if you'd
every
have the
answer we
courage
find
to
seems
take
to open
humanity's
up
most
even
dangerous
deeper
trip.
questions. If the universe is
The enormous
finite, what
distance
determines
between
its
Earth and
size? If
Mars
it has no
is one of the
edge, what does
biggest
that even
reasons
mean?
why
And
the
if
first
infinity is
humans
just
on
a
Mars may never
mathematical
return.
concept, then why has it become
Unlike
so
traveling to
deeply
the moon,
embedded in how
which
we
is
imagine
relatively close
reality?
to
So as
Earth,
we move forward,
Mars
don't
sits
think
at a
of this as
far
just a
greater distance
discussion
that
about size
constantly
or
changes as
distance.
both
Think of it
planets
as an
orbit the Sun.
exploration of how we know what we
At the
know.
closest
Because the
point,
truth about the
Mars can
universe
be
is
around
not just
54
out there in the
million
stars,
kilometers
it's hidden
away,
in the way we
but at other
observe, measure,
times it
and
can be
question
more than
everything around us.
400
And by the
million
time we reach the end
kilometers
of this journey, you may
distant.
not just see the
This
universe
means any mission
differently,
to
you may
Mars
start to
must
question the
wait for
very
the right
idea of
launch
infinity
window.
itself. When we talk about
What
the
if I told you
observable
the first
universe
people who
having
land on
limits, we are
Mars may
not talking
become
about a
the
wall at the
most
edge of
famous
space or
humans in
some cosmic
history?
boundary you could crash
But
into,
they may
like the
never
edge of a
step
table.
foot
What
on
we are
Earth
really
again.
talking about is a
This
limit
mission
created
won't
by
be a
time
simple
itself.
space
Light
trip.
does not travel
It could
infinitely
be a
fast,
one-way
it has a
journey into the
maximum speed.
unknown,
And because the
where a
universe
single
has a
mistake
beginning
means
in time,
death
there hasn't
and
been enough
rescue is
time for light
almost
from
impossible.
arbitrarily distant regions to reach
Imagine
us.
leaving your
So when you
family,
look
your
out into
planet,
space, whether
and
through a
everything you've
telescope or
ever
with
known
your own eyes
forever.
at the night
Would you
sky,
still
you are
go?
not seeing everything that
Before we
exists. You are
begin,
seeing everything
comment
whose
below
light has
where
had
you're
enough
watching
time to
from,
arrive.
and
This
if you'd
creates
have the
what physicists
courage to
call a
take
horizon,
humanity's
not
most
because
dangerous
something
trip.
physical is there, but because
The
beyond
enormous
that
distance
distance,
between Earth
information
and
simply
Mars
hasn't had
is
time
one
to
of the
reach you.
biggest
If the
reasons
universe is
why
about
the first humans
13.8
on
billion
Mars
years
may
old,
never
then in a
return.
naive sense, you might
Unlike
think we
traveling
can
to
see
the moon,
13.8
which is
billion light
relatively
years away.
close to
But because
Earth,
the universe has been
Mars sits at a
expanding while that
far
light
greater
traveled,
distance
the
that
actual
constantly
observable
changes as
radius
both
is much
planets
larger,
orbit the
tens
Sun.
of billions of light years.
At the
Even
closest
so,
point,
it is still
Mars
finite.
can be
This is a
around
profound
54 million
limitation. It means
kilometers
that
away,
any statement
but at
about the
other
entire
times it can
universe
be
is,
more
in a
than
strict sense,
400
a
million
statement about something
kilometers
we cannot fully
distant.
observe. It's like
This means
standing in a
any mission
foggy
to
field
Mars
and trying to
must wait for
determine
the
how
right
large the
launch
field
window.
is when you can only see a
What if I
certain
told you the
distance in
first
every
people who land
direction.
on
The
Mars
fog
may
is not
become
space
the
itself,
most
it's the
famous
finite speed
humans in
of light and
history?
the finite age of the
But they may
cosmos.
never
Now,
step
this leads
foot on
directly
Earth
into a
again.
confusion that many
This
people
mission
have.
won't
If
be
we
a
can
simple
only
space
observe a
trip.
finite region,
It
does
could be
that
a
mean the
one-way
universe
journey into
itself
the
is
unknown,
finite? And the
where
answer
a
is,
single mistake means
surprisingly, we
death
don't actually
and
know for
rescue is
certain. The
almost
observable universe
impossible.
is finite, but the
Imagine
total
leaving your
universe might be
family, your
much
planet,
larger or even
and everything
infinite.
you've
The
ever
key
known
mistake
forever.
people make mistake is
Would you
assuming
still
that
go?
what we can see defines
Before
what
we
exists.
begin,
It doesn't.
comment
Our
below
observations are
where you're
limited by
watching
physical
from,
laws,
and if
not by
you'd
the
have the
size of
courage
reality.
to take
Scientists try
humanity's
to
most
infer the
dangerous
global
trip.
structure of the universe from
The
local
enormous
measurements,
distance
much like
between
trying
Earth
to
and
determine
Mars
the shape of
is
the
one of the
Earth by
biggest
looking at the
reasons
ground beneath
why
your
the
feet.
first
For
humans on
example, if
Mars
you
may
measure
never
the angles
return.
of a triangle drawn on a
Unlike traveling
surface,
to the
you can
Moon,
learn something
which
about the
is
curvature
relatively
of that
close to
surface. In
Earth,
cosmology, we
Mars
do
sits at
something
a
similar
far
with
greater
light,
distance that
galaxies, and
constantly
cosmic
changes as
background
both planets
radiation.
orbit the
Observations
Sun.
from satellites and
At the
telescopes suggest
closest
that,
point,
on large
Mars can
scales,
be
the
around
universe is
54
very close
million
to
kilometers
geometrically
away,
flat. But
but
flat
at
in
other
this sense
times it
does
can be
not
more than
necessarily mean
400
infinite. It
million
only tells you
kilometers
about the curvature,
distant.
not the total
This
size. A
means any
flat
mission to
universe could
Mars
still wrap
must
around
wait
in a
for the right
complicated
launch
way, like a
window.
video game map where
What if
exiting
I
one
told you the
side
first
brings you
people who
back on the
land on
other. So
Mars
the
may
debate
become
between
the
finite and infinite is not
humans in
settled by
history.
simple observation. It
But
requires
they may never
deeper
step
reasoning
foot
about
on Earth
geometry,
again.
topology, and
This
the laws
mission
that
won't be
govern
a simple
space-time
space
itself.
trip.
The idea that the
It could
universe
be a
might be
one-way
finite
journey
but
into the
unbounded
unknown,
is one of
where
those
a single
concepts that
mistake
feels
means
almost
death
designed to
and
confuse the
rescue is
human brain.
almost
We are used to
impossible.
objects having edges. A
Imagine
table
leaving your
ends
family,
somewhere,
your
a room
planet,
has walls,
and
but not
everything
all
you've ever
spaces
known
behave that
forever.
way.
Would
Consider
you
the
still
surface of a
go?
sphere. If you are a tiny
Before we
creature
begin,
living on that
comment
surface,
below
you can travel in
where you're
any
watching
direction
from,
and never
and if you
encounter
have
an
the
edge.
courage
Yet the
to
surface
take
area is
humanity's most
finite. You
dangerous
could,
trip.
in principle, measure it.
The
The trick
enormous
is that the
distance
surface
between
curves
Earth
back
and
on itself
Mars
in a higher
is one of the
dimension.
biggest
Now, our
reasons
universe
why
is
the
not the
first
surface of a
humans on
sphere
Mars
in
may
the
never
ordinary
return.
sense, but the analogy
Unlike
helps.
traveling to
Space
the
itself
moon,
could have a
which
similar
is
property,
relatively close
finite in
to Earth,
volume but without
Mars
boundaries.
sits at
If
a
you
far
traveled in a
greater
straight line
distance that
long enough,
constantly
you might
changes as
eventually
both
return to
planets
your
orbit
starting
the
point.
Sun.
Not because you turned
At
around,
the
but
closest
because
point,
space itself
Mars
is
can be
curved in a
around
way that
54
closes back
million
on itself.
kilometers
This is
away.
not science
But at
fiction.
other
It is a
times, it can be
mathematically
more than
consistent solution
400
to the
million
equations of general
kilometers
relativity. And it
distant.
highlights something
This means any
important. Our
mission to
intuition,
Mars must
shaped by
wait for the
everyday
right launch
experience, is
window.
not always a reliable
What
guide
if I
when
told you the
thinking
first
about the
people who land
cosmos.
on
The
Mars may
universe does
become
not owe
the
us
most
simplicity
famous
or
humans in
familiarity.
history?
It behaves according to its
But
own
they may
rules,
never
and
step
those
foot
rules
on
often
Earth
lead to
again.
possibilities
This
that seem
mission
strange
won't
at
be a
first
simple
but
space
become
trip.
logical when you
It
examine
could
them
be a one-way
carefully.
journey
The
into
expansion
the
of the
unknown,
universe adds
where a
another
single
layer of
mistake means
complexity to this
death
whole
and
discussion.
rescue
It was
is
the work of
almost
astronomers
impossible.
like Edwin Hubble that
Imagine
revealed
leaving your
something
family, your
astonishing.
planet,
Distant galaxies
and
are moving
everything
away
you've
from
ever
us,
known
and the
forever.
farther they are,
Would you
the
still
faster they
go?
recede. This is not
Before we
because we are at
begin,
the center of some
comment below
explosion, but
where you're
because
watching
space
from,
itself is
and if you
stretching.
have the
Imagine
courage
drawing
to
dots
take
on the surface
humanity's
of a
most
balloon
dangerous
and then
trip.
inflating it. As the
The
balloon
enormous
expands, every
distance
dot
between
moves
Earth and
away from
Mars
every other
is
dot.
one of the
No
biggest
single dot is the
reasons
center of
why
the
the first
expansion.
humans
The
on
expansion
Mars
is
may never
happening
return.
everywhere. In the same way, the
Unlike
universe
traveling
is
to the
expanding
moon,
in all
which is
directions,
relatively
and every
close to
observer
Earth,
sees distant
Mars
galaxies
sits at a
moving away.
far
This
greater
expansion
distance
has
that
crucial
constantly
implications
changes
for
as
the
both
question of
planets orbit
infinity.
the Sun.
First, it means that
At the
distances are
closest
not
point,
fixed. The size
Mars
of the
can be
universe
around
is changing
54
over
million
time.
kilometers
Second, it
away.
introduces the
But at
idea
other
that some
times, it can
regions
be
of
more
space
than
are receding from
400
us
million
faster than the speed of
kilometers
light. Not because
distant.
they are moving through
This means
space that
any mission
quickly,
to
but
Mars
because the
must
space
wait for
between
the
us
right
and them
launch
is
window.
expanding. This creates a
What
kind
if
of
I told you
dynamic
the first
horizon.
people who
There are
land on
regions
Mars
whose
may
light will
become
never reach
the
us, no
most
matter how
famous
long we
humans in
wait, because the
history?
expansion keeps
But
pushing them
they may
away
never
faster
step
than their
foot
light
on
can
Earth
travel
again?
toward us. So
This
even in an
mission won't
infinite
be a simple
universe, there would
space
still
trip.
be a finite
It
region
could
that
be
is
a one-way
observable,
journey
and
into
that
the
region could
unknown,
even shrink
where a
in terms
single
of
mistake
accessible
means
information
death
over
and
time. The
rescue is
expansion does
almost
not just
impossible.
stretch space, it stretches
Imagine
our
leaving your
ability to
family,
know.
your
The
planet,
geometry of space
and
plays a
everything you've
central
ever
role
known
in
forever.
determining whether the
Would you still
universe is
go?
finite or infinite.
Before we
In general
begin,
relativity, the
comment below
distribution of
where you're
matter and
watching from,
energy
and if
determines
you'd
the
have the
curvature of
courage to
space-time.
take
If there is
humanity's
enough
most
matter,
dangerous trip.
space can curve positively,
The
like a
enormous
sphere,
distance
leading to a
between Earth
closed
and
universe
Mars
that is
is
finite.
one of the
If there is
biggest
too little
reasons
matter,
why the
space
first
can curve
humans on
negatively,
Mars may
like a
never
saddle,
return.
leading to an open
Unlike
universe
traveling
that
to
is
the moon,
infinite. And if
which
the
is
density
relatively
is just
close to
right,
Earth,
space can be flat,
Mars
which
sits at a
sits at the
far
boundary
greater
between
distance
these
that constantly
possibilities.
changes as
Measurements
both
of the
planets
cosmic
orbit the
microwave
Sun.
background radiation,
At
the
the closest
afterglow of
point,
the early
Mars
universe,
can be around
suggest that we are
54
very
million
close to this
kilometers
flat
away.
case. But very
But at other
close is
times,
not the
it can be
same as
more than
exact. And even
400
exact
million
flatness does
kilometers
not uniquely
distant.
determine whether the
This means
universe is
any mission to
infinite.
Mars
Topology
must
comes
wait
into
for the
play
right
here.
launch
Two spaces
window.
can have the same local
What if I
geometry
told you
but
the first
different
people
global
who land on
structures.
Mars
For
may
example,
become
a
the
flat sheet
most
of
famous
paper is
humans in
infinite,
history?
but you could also take that
But they
sheet
may
and
never
wrap it
step
into a
foot on
cylinder
Earth
or a
again?
torus, creating
This
a
mission
finite
won't be
space
a
with no
simple
edges
space trip.
while preserving
It
flatness
could be a
locally.
one-way
So when
journey into the
cosmologists say
unknown,
the universe is
where a
flat,
single
they are
mistake
talking
means
about local
death
curvature,
and
not
rescue is
necessarily
almost
global size.
impossible.
Determining the topology
Imagine
of the
leaving your
universe is
family, your
much harder
planet,
because it
and
requires
everything
looking
you've
for
ever known
repeating
forever.
patterns or
Would you
correlations
still
across
go?
vast distances,
Before we
essentially
begin,
trying to see if the
comment below
universe
where
wraps
you're
around
watching
in a
from,
detectable predictable way. So far, no conclusive evidence of such wrapping has been found. But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The universe could be finite in a way that is simply too large for us to detect with current observations. Finally, there is the idea of infinity itself, which is often treated as if it were a physical property rather than a mathematical concept. In mathematics, infinity is well defined and incredibly useful. It allows us to describe limits, infinite series, and unbounded sets with precision. But when we bring infinity into physics, we have to be careful. Just because a theory allows for an infinite quantity does not mean that quantity exists in reality. In fact, infinities in physical theories often signal that something is incomplete or needs refinement. For example, certain calculations in quantum field theory initially produce infinite results, which must then be handled through a process called renormalization to yield finite, physically meaningful answers. So infinity in physics is often more of a warning sign than a conclusion. When we ask whether the universe is infinite, we are really asking whether there is any physical evidence that space extends without bound. And so far, the evidence does not compel that conclusion. It is consistent with an infinite universe, but also consistent with a finite one that is simply very large. This distinction matters because infinity has strange implications. In an infinite universe with a roughly uniform distribution of matter, every possible configuration of particles would occur somewhere, leading to the idea of exact duplicates of regions or even entire observable universes existing infinitely many times. That is a fascinating idea, but it rests on the assumption of actual infinity in physical space, which has not been empirically established. It is a possibility, not a proven fact. And in science, possibilities are not the same as truths. So now, after traveling through horizons of light, bending geometries, and a strange idea that something can be finite without having an edge, we arrive at a conclusion that is both humbling and electrifying. The universe may not be infinite, not because we've proven it must be finite, but because the deeper we look, the more we realize that infinity is not something nature is obligated to provide. It is something we invented to make sense of patterns, and sometimes reality turns out to be far more subtle than the ideas we use to describe it. What we've uncovered is not just a statement about size, but a shift in perspective. The universe is not a simple backdrop stretching endlessly into nothingness. It is a structured, evolving, and possibly bounded system, one that plays by rules we are still struggling to fully understand. And perhaps the most surprising truth is this: the limits we encounter are not just out there in space, but in here, in how we observe, measure, and interpret reality itself. And that's the real shock. Not that the universe has an end or doesn't, but that our certainty about it begins to dissolve the moment we ask the right questions. So instead of walking away with a final answer, walk away with something far more powerful: curiosity. Because science has never been about closing the case, it has always been about opening better questions. And the universe, whether finite or infinite, is still inviting us to explore it, challenge it, and rethink everything we thought we knew. Thank you for being part of this journey, for staying curious, and for daring to question something as vast as the universe itself. I wish you the very best in your own exploration of ideas, discovery, and imagination. Good luck and keep looking up.